Good evening, everyone. In this presentation, I will be discussing various aspects of New Zealand's overall security, the purpose and benefits of implementing a cybersecurity risk assessment, as well as recommendations to improve or eradicate the identified weaknesses. Let us begin. We will first start off by discussing risk assessment criteria. The cybersecurity risk assessment tool will be used to evaluate the robustness of IT controls associated with the organization's current security posture. Completion of the cybersecurity risk assessment will define current measures for authentication, authorization, access control, as well as identify any weaknesses within the organization's security. The weaknesses identified have been categorized as observed risks that have the potential to result in a successful exploitation of known vulnerabilities or threats. Recommendations for remediations have been provided for each observation listed. Security professionals should work amongst one another to ensure all observations that correspond with their departmental oversight are addressed and remediated. If remediation cannot be achieved, an alternative decision should be made, and necessary steps associated with them should be followed and documented. We will begin by discussing the three various phases that will assist in the development of our cybersecurity risk assessment process. We must ensure that our organization is choosing the appropriate security controls that correlate to the risks our organization faces. To be successful in our attempts, we must identify all aspects of our environment, both internal and external, analyze those findings so that we are knowledgeable, and evaluate on the best mitigation strategies as well as industry best practices that can be used as both protective and preventative measures. The importance of this process will also have to make note that depending on the nation state that we are currently working with or doing dealings with, we should also take into consideration their industry best practices so that we are adhering to any contractual agreements. So as we take a current look into our environment today, we currently implement security measures through our organization that align with industry best practices. However, due to the continuous advancements in technology, the opportunities for improvements are continuous. The next 3 slides will discuss what security measures are being implemented within our organization for authentication, authorization, and access control. Before we jump into authorization and what we currently have being implemented, we'd like to first give a brief definition of authorization to ensure we're all on the same page. So, for authorization, placing priority on determining users' access rights associated with their roles and responsibilities. In this area, we focus on what mechanisms can be used by our system to either grant or revoke that access. We currently implement API keys, which are keys passed that must match against servers list on a server's list of authorized keys before authorization can be granted. We offer basic authorization, which just includes a simple username and password that must be correct for authorization to be granted. Occasionally accompanied by basic authorization, we may implement multi-factor authentication through various tools offered currently to our organization. We offer HMAC, which is basically a security key used to sign requests, and the goal is to prevent cybercriminals from getting access and ensuring information comes from a trusted source. Working in our type of industry, it is very important that we are sure that the data that we're sending and receiving is correct and accurate. We also utilize OAuth, which basically loops in the use of third-party resources to produce access tokens that can be used to authorize the request of a user. An example of this would be allowing Outlook to access your mobile contact list. For authentication, we define this as it focuses on verifying users or objects to be who or what they claim to be. An example of authentication would be something you know, which could be a password or a PIN, something you have, which could be a key, badge, or token, and something that you are, biometric, voice, fingerprints, recognition. Depending on the severity of the data type or how classified an item might be, naturally we would want to start implementing more of these tools together or different authentication methods together, so that way we have a higher level of security being associated to some of the items. For access control, it focuses on the security framework that is used to determine who or what has access based on the rules provided by authentication and authorization. Access controls are put in place to authenticate users during a verification process or predetermined attributes. Access control can be listed in the following ways for which we currently have them implemented: role-based access control, or better known as RBAC, discretionary access control, or attribute-based access control. Role-based access control would be focusing on access control and access control criteria that is determined based on organizational roles. If access to a specific area or function is not required for individuals with a specific role/title, then access is restricted. This operation is usually handled via system administrator who provisions access based on approval systems. Naturally, if individuals do not require an elevated set of roles and responsibilities, then they should not have access. They should only need access for what specifically they need to perform their role. For discretionary access control criteria is determined based on predefined administrator who determines who and when to give access as it pertains to a single user. Access is granted based on the administrator's discretion. So they can either give access or revoke it. It's up to them. And attribute-based access control uses the access control criteria that is determined based on the level of risk associated with the access as well as the context for which access is needed. This type of access allows administrators to focus more on granting access for items with similar attributes. Naturally, in all different types of access control, we like to implement a series of approval processes and let it be accompanied by business justification. So if an individual is being brought on to a team, then naturally we would have a review from their members of leadership, flowing from director, manager, usually keeping it pretty high level, so that once we receive their business justification along with the approvals for why it's needed for their specific role, then we can proceed. But naturally following, if they were to transition into another role or become terminated, or if they just determined they no longer wanted to be a part of the organization, then we would go through that process of removing that access within 24 hours of receiving notification of next stages for their employment. So for our recommended security controls, the recommended security controls can have a positive impact on how our organization security professionals will protect our organization. These security controls will help reduce the risks by acting as mitigating strategies. Because risk to the organization is not an avoidable occurrence, these security controls will provide the necessary assistance required to prevent any threats from exploiting vulnerabilities. Each recommended security control can be categorized as either physical, technical, or administrative. The characteristics for each control will be one of the three: preventative, detective, or corrective. This means the recommended control is put in place to act as either of the three. These controls will work together to achieve the goal or reducing an impact from a security event. And if implemented properly, these security controls can only enhance and better secure our environments, as well as strengthening our security posture present to our customers. The different types of security controls that we currently have implemented, again, they will either be categorized as physical, technical, or administrative, and be put in place to do one of the following: preventative, detective, or corrective. So currently for physical controls, some of the preventative measures that we have would be locks, gates, and fences. And then for the physical detective controls, we would use security cameras or 24-hour surveillance. So CCTV, motion detecting lights, things like that. And then for some of our physical corrective measures that we currently have in place would be routine badge verification and maintenance for building repairs. some items that we currently would like to implement or that we don't currently have and would be recommended would be security guards to act as that physical, alive presence on our grounds and within our environment that is continuously monitoring not only the footage but then also in real time. And also, if we ever have any events or any concerns, we can get someone over there to that area specifically. Metal detectors to also protect against any unwanted authorized access with items brought into the environment that would not be allowed. And motion lights, so that way, in addition to the 24-hour surveillance and security cameras, they can act as a deterrent for any unwanted access or intruders. And then, in addition to that as well, heat sensors, just in case anyone were to bypass these current physical measures that we have in place. For our technical controls, we currently have preventative measures such as multi-factor authentication, firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, and antivirus throughout our systems and on our assets. For our detective controls, technical controls, some of the detective measures would be intrusion detection systems and honeypots. And for our corrective technical controls, we currently have vulnerability scanning and patching and device quarantine procedures. Some recommended technical controls that we should implement would be system and machine timeouts, so that any machine or system that is sitting idle will be turned off or go inactive or require a sign-in. The recommended time frame for that window would usually be somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes, but depending on the system and the type of data it holds, 5 minutes would be the ideal time. And also increasing password complexity requirements, so naturally doing something along the lines of 10 to 12 characters, using various numbers, letters, characters, and then also not allowing a reuse of at minimum 24 passwords. For our administrative controls, the preventative measures that we currently have on board are onboarding and offboarding procedures, natural separation of duties within roles, data classification, so placing data into a list, whether it be PII, ITAR, EAR, and it continues. And then data labeling, to make sure that any data that is listed as CUI or other data classification types are correctly labeled and using a specific color scheme, potentially red for extremely classified, medium for somewhat, and then green for available, but all still within a specific approved type of scheme. Administrative detective controls that we currently have would be audit logs and quarterly access review procedures. For our corrective administrative controls, we currently have incident response plans, business continuity plans, and a business impact analysis. For recommended administrative controls, we have security awareness training, digital signage, and Active Directory account disablement. As we flow into our risk mitigation strategy, as previously mentioned, risk is an unavoidable phenomenon that the organization will continue to face. Understanding and identifying organizational risk allows us to determine the best steps moving forward. There are vast amounts of strategies we can take for addressing these risks. In this section, we will begin to identify some options that can benefit the organization. Well, when dealing with risk, we are faced with 4 possible solutions. We can either accept the risk, transfer the risk, avoid the risk, or reduce the risk. A risk acceptance will be as follows. So it's exactly as it reads, an acceptance of the risk as is with no mitigation strategy. The risk acceptance process should include a responsible party or someone who is to be considered the data owner that can take on the responsibility associated with the known risk. Naturally, the data owner would be informed of the risk, why it is a risk, and what that risk acceptance process looks like. 9 times out of 10, it should probably be someone who is within IT or has elevated credentials or privileges, where they have been tasked with the responsibility of being a data owner who can also accept the risk. So someone at an associate level would not be able to provide a risk acceptance. It would 9 times out of 10 have to be either a more senior member of a team and or again managerial and above. Risk transference or transfer of risk can be proven beneficial during instances when our organization does not want to be held responsible or acquiring the costs associated with an action that poses a risk. So transferring the risk to a third party can allow the burden of responsibility to be placed on someone or something that specializes in protecting a specific type of data or asset. Typical examples of these would be e-commerce websites using a PCI compliant company to handle payments, something like Chase Merchant Tech, or a financial obligation to run and maintain is too high, or the liability and legal requirements are severe. So anything where we would not want to be held reliable for something like that, or when the opportunity to transfer the risk is there, naturally we would want to. Again, this does depend on a case-by-case scenario and contractual requirements as well. If there's anything that does not allow us to transfer the risk, then we will move on, so forth. Next, we have avoid the risk altogether, which requires the organization to implement and deploy professional teams and extensive technologies to protect against any known risks. So utilizing the National Vulnerability Database to help determine what vulnerabilities exist and their severity level, as well as conducting risk assessments on a third party or external resources or services provided prior to being allowed within the environment. Naturally, best measures to avoid the risk would be to follow all of the guidelines that would be set in place on if we were working with a specific government or entity that has very high security standards and utilize a lot of security policies or best practices implemented through either NIST or other organizations that have higher standards and requirements. Another section that we could do for risk mitigation is to reduce the risk. And this can be done through identification of all perceived and current risks, determining the probability of the risk impacting the organization and its severity, developing mitigation strategies to counteract the risk, continuous monitoring of the environment, risk presenting object, person, place, or thing, and lastly, disaster recovery planning for a worst case scenario. A lot of the reduce of risk we've actually taken a step towards within our vulnerability assessment matrix, and it goes in depth with how we intend to reduce the risk by also placing, again, that severity level and likelihood calculations assigned to them, along with any risk mitigation strategy. So currently, like most organizations or environments, we have some weaknesses within our organization's security. 3 identified weaknesses within our organization's security would naturally be people, technology, and policy. Initially, people, for other reasons that I will go in, would naturally be one of the organization's main weaknesses, primarily because a lot goes into people. And naturally, we do not have the type of environment where we micromanage. However, if individuals are not paying as well as attention or adhering to a lot of the security practices or policies, all it takes is for one wrong click. So weaknesses within the 3 areas to the left can result in successful exploitation of current vulnerabilities or threats. People can either be a weakness intentionally, as in they have some malicious actions and they're deliberately going out of their way to cause a security event, or unintentionally human error or negligence. So someone not reviewing to ensure that the email address that they are currently typing in is correct and they're sending a sensitive document. And in addition to that, sending up a sensitive document, they're not utilizing per se a SFTP site or encrypting the data. The organization must account for user impact by ensuring we are hiring and training knowledgeable people while also monitoring and deploying a system that separates duties. It is important to expand a set level of trust to our personnel, but we need to continuously review to make sure they are reflecting our best practices, policies, and procedures. Naturally, if they choose not to, then that will lead to either further discussion with managerial levels, assigning more training, and/or unfortunately, in the unlikely event, it could potentially lead to suspension or termination. Technology, although beneficial and can reduce human error, requires continuous upkeep and vetting to make sure it can protect and operate as intended. Known vulnerabilities on our technology is prime targets for cybercriminals who aim to gain access to our organization and its data. Continuous monitoring of our networks and routine patches and remediations need to be made so that we are aware of our environment's current security standing. The quicker we address these things, the likelihood of a security event can be prevented or eliminated. Naturally, similar to a lot of vulnerabilities, there is a known understanding of some vulnerabilities are made available within the vulnerability database. So you would naturally want to improve or remediate anything that is publicly available information to reduce the likelihood of an attacker being made aware or privy to that information and making us subject to a potential attack. Policy in our organization is our organization's biggest weakness as well, seemingly because having poor processes and procedures impact the strength of people and technology because it allows the sharing and lack of attention to how our technology is being used and taken care of. It is expected that we follow industry recommended policies and frameworks so that we can audit ourselves internally and by an external party who will test and expose any weaknesses within our organization's security. Continuous monitoring and training are good practices for running and maintaining as well. Naturally, if our policies do not reflect what it is we are currently trying to implement or enforce within our organization, then we can't expect these things to actually occur or happen. So it's important that we have strength within our verbiage and within our documentation, as well as within our current presence. So, current recommendations for how we can improve in these areas. For people, we should hire individuals with a skill set aligned for a specific role or responsibility. Naturally, we have some openings and some wiggle room where we could probably hire to train, but for the most part, we want to hire individuals who have a background or skill set in what it is we're currently trying to implement. We should have quarterly security awareness training, enhanced security awareness training for IT professionals or users with roles that have privileged access. So anything with a system where they have specific access, where they're placed into a group that allows them or grants them access to this type of data or information, training should be assigned accordingly to different roles and responsibilities and be applicable to what it is they're doing. Overall, security training for the entire environment that goes over basic best practices, but then also role-specific training. And quarterly termination and transfer review process to ensure user accounts are disabled and access is revoked. Naturally, if we have anyone within our environment that is no longer with the company or has transitioned into a different role, they should not still have access to previous roles. For technology, we should enforce risk assessment processes for the acquisition of external software or hardware, and loop in financial business partners, project managers, infrastructures, member of legal and cybersecurity risk management teams accordingly for the approval process based on specific data types and use cases. So nothing should be coming into the environment that is external that has not been properly vetted, nor should we just be allowing downloads or plugins to any of our devices. So anything that is external and not already pre-approved for basic business operations should be going through risk assessments and be receiving prior approval from all the corresponding departments that have specific data associations or affiliations to any of the identified data types that will be used with either software, hardware, or services provided. Networked items should be linked to monitoring technologies that report any missing controls or server and endpoint vulnerabilities not reporting. We should be able to have dashboards and databases readily available for different IT professional teams to be able to see what current vulnerabilities are in our environment, how long they've been in our environment, and who the correct point of contact within our environment is to provide that support or get it remediated. We should also be assigning designated individuals with the role of ensuring items are being remediated or mitigated. so that things are not just sitting in our environment waiting for someone to do something. So either it be tasked to a specific team that handles specific vulnerabilities or remediations, or a specific individual. For policy recommendations where we can improve, continuous review of organizational deployed policies so that are being reviewed for accuracy and applicability. Naturally, we shouldn't have policies from 5 years ago without being reviewed on a yearly basis, at least minimum annual basis, so that we can see how the policies are currently aligned, or if anything needs to change, or if anything within our industry has changed, so that they're also being updated to reflect. Audit schedules for internal 6 months and external audits annual are conducted. We should be reviewing ourselves internally and have a designated team that performs internal audits, so that we can be prepared in the event that we have our external audit that is going to come up at the end of the year, and we can make sure that whenever information or anything is requested on us, we've already reviewed ourselves against it, and when the time comes to be reviewed externally, we can make sure that we're actually aligned with our own policy. So we shouldn't wait until external sources come in, which will assign us a scale rating, which can hinder contracts or any potential opportunities for growth within the organization. And we should also maintain up to date on industry standard changes and recommendations that would or could be applicable to us or our customers. And we should also renew industry certification. So industry certification should follow the renewal date that is initially assigned, and as well, again, maintaining up-to-date industry standard changes. So being aware and knowledgeable of what's currently going on within our industry and our customers for whom we serve, so that we can make sure that we're meeting their requirements, as well as maintaining even up-to-date service level agreements, or just simple negotiations or agreements that we've currently went into for specific contracts, and making sure we're also eligible for contracts that we could potentially bet on, so that we can have that as an opportunity and continue to grow and thrive as an organization. So this would conclude the presentation on our cybersecurity risk assessment. This slide just includes various references. If there are any questions, we can take them now. Thank you.